You're listening to You Don't Have to Be Crazy, the 10-minute payroll podcast from Payslip, and this is part 2 of my conversation with Jodi Parsons. The armchair psychologist in me, Jodi, draws parallels between the world of sports too, because that is the natural path too of so many sports people, and not necessarily at the highest professional level,
Right.
but at amateur level too, where it's you enjoy the sport as a practitioner, and then the time comes where you make that transition to being a leader and an educator and bringing the next generation of players along. Do you think that probably because of your interest in sport that you've gravitated toward a position, I know you serve on the board of PAYO and you're hugely involved. Do you think that's a natural sort of segue, that it makes sense that you would go on then to share your knowledge just as you would have if you'd stayed in sports?
I do. I've never really set out to be a leader. It's just always been something that, again, like you mentioned, has come naturally to me, and I do it. I tend to see myself as a leader by showing instead of maybe always being the one that's speaking or out in the forefront. I want people to see me as an equal, and hopefully they're seeing me be humble and be someone that's trustworthy and that they can truly feel comfortable approaching to learn more about payroll.
Along the way, what's the most unexpected skill you've learned?
For me, two things come to mind. The first one is creativity, which some people may think that doesn't go with a profession that's so rules and regulations driven.
Yeah.
However, we come across events within our career that make us have to think about how to do it differently, how to improvise, how to be more efficient, how to get the job done when there's a roadblock in the way. In fact, just recently was processing payroll and it felt like everything in the system broke and I wasn't sure how I was going to get the payroll out the door, and obviously we need to get the payroll out the door. So I had to take a step back and tap into that creative side of me to be like, what tools do I have, or how can I accomplish my goal of getting this payroll done? So I think creativity is important, and then the other piece of it is empathy. Again, sometimes we are seen as maybe cold-hearted because we are so focused on regulation and compliance and those hard line areas of our career. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that the person receiving the paycheck on the other side is a human, and we don't necessarily know their whole story or know what's going on in their lives. So we have to make sure that we're empathetic when situations arise that may be causing them some sort of hardship, or even when they're on the other end of the line, maybe yelling because they feel like their paycheck isn't right. So those are the two unexpected skills that I feel like I've developed and really worked on throughout my career.
Amazing. If you were hiring, or when you're hiring someone, I'm tempted to say if you were drafting a new payroll recruit, but I promised myself I wouldn't make too many baseball puns. But what are the skills, and perhaps even more importantly, what are the attributes or the characteristics that you're looking for in a person when you want them on your team?
I think one is that they have to be dedicated. They have to understand that payroll is, as much as we want it to be a 9 to 5 job, it's just not going to be. So someone that's dedicated, that's willing to, put the paycheck before maybe personal responsibilities at times. That's not always, it's not always that way, but I think that's important. Someone that's a lifelong learner is important because, as I mentioned, payroll changes a lot. I've said in the past that another reason that I love payroll is because it's the same every day, but yet it changes every day. So you have to have that desire to educate yourself, be able to know where to educate yourself. That's important. Another piece that's important is a good communicator, because you have to communicate well, not with only your own team members within the payroll department. You have to be able to communicate well across the organization, from HR to finance to, again, the the team members, the employees that you serve. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to really take the time to understand where that individual is coming from so you can address their needs.
I like to scratch at some old wounds, Jodi. Have you ever had a payroll nightmare? One of those pay runs where everything just goes totally wrong, or just, what was your traumatic experience? This doubles up as a therapy session too, Jodi.
I actually have two, but the first one is we all know that payroll systems are not all created equally, especially when they are a module of a financial package. In this case, that financial package was named SOS. So we'll kind of let your mind kind of go with that. But
Yeah.
but the other one is more of a nightmare that defined my career and taught me how to interact with leadership that I didn't necessarily see eye to eye with when it came to compliance. So I was working at an organization and the executives had received compensation that met the definition of supplemental wages. And it has always been my stance to process these types of wages using what's known in the United States as the optional flat rate income tax withholding rate. And after processing the payments, the executives were really unhappy because in the past they were able to dictate not only if their payments were processed using their W-4 form on file, they could elect exempt even if they reached the $1 million threshold, which then has a requirement of withholding, or they were able to select a flat percentage of their own choosing, and they wanted their payments reprocessed because of that past practice. And during the conversation with the senior leader of the shared services division that I was reporting to, we had a very frank discussion regarding compliance as it related to the United States income tax withholding and shared the support for my stance. And as we went through the conversation, I was asked if I was telling the leader no. And in the moment, I managed to practice the power of the pause before I responded, which for me particularly is very unusual, but somehow it came over me to pause. And I gathered my thoughts, and my response was something along the lines of, I'm not saying no. However, being a certified payroll professional is very important to me on a personal and professional level. The certification requires me to adhere to a code of ethics as well. And in the payroll profession, the CPP is just as important as having a CPA in your profession as an accountant. And I requested that if they wanted the payments to be reprocessed, that I would be willing to do so if they would provide the request in writing. I didn't receive anything in writing, and therefore the payments weren't reprocessed. I did move on from that company after that interaction since I realized it was not a good fit for me or my career. But it taught me that you have to know what your boundaries are and how you are going to respond. You aren't always going to be able to lay down the compliance card or provide support for your position and have leadership agree with you. They have to determine their or the organization's risk for tolerance and make that business decision. And it is our responsibility to the organization to have and share that information, as well as our responsibility to ourselves to document why your recommendation was overruled. I have what I refer to as my CYA folders for every organization I've ever worked at. CYA means cover your behind, basically. So that really, like I said, that was a nightmare for me because I thought that at the time that was where I wanted to be company wise as far as size and industry, those types of things, and quickly realized that it just wasn't. And so it gave me the opportunity to really set my career path in a direction that I knew I wanted to be in.
Love that. A nightmare, I guess, in that moment, but actually it sort of was a crucial or pivotal point because I guess it reinforced who you are and what you stand for, and that's the basis on which you have a great career.
It did.
That's it for part 2 of my conversation with the wonderful Jodi Parsons. Be sure to like, subscribe, and don't miss out on part 3.